as loud as I can. Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me here. It's a great meal and it's a great audience, so hopefully I can maybe give a decent talk. Let me give a little background geographically. Macon, Georgia is in the middle of the state of Georgia, really in the deep south. It's not a really teeny-weeny little town, but it wasn't a huge town either. And that's where my parents settled after coming from Huiping, in China, and they operated a laundry. So as I progressed through my education and career and became a professional, I often thought about my parents' situation as they dealt with the realities of coming to a new country and not knowing the language and the customs. And I know that many Chinese have had similar problems, and I really learned a lot more about this as I've given various talks, because one of the real rewards of doing these talks is getting to meet a lot of people and hearing their experiences. And the funny thing is that after I talked to a few dozen people, I discovered or felt that, hey, my story is not that interesting compared to some of the ones these other people have. And I would like to encourage those people to sort of try to document the lives of their families as well. And it's hard in a way, and yet it's not hard. You have to start somewhere, and it can be done. Even though I'm a academically trained person and I've done research and written academic stuff, what I'm writing here is not even in my field. I'm not really a historian. I'm a kind of wannabe historian. I sort of found it a nice way to be involved with something that was personally rewarding and I felt was useful for a lot of other people. And that's the real motivation behind doing this type of work. So anyway, when I wrote Southern Fried Rice, I initially wanted to talk about my mother and her hardships. Not to say that my father had an easy life either, but as the book evolved and with some consultation from other experienced writers, the target of the book sort of shifted a little bit toward me or my perceptions of our family and what things were like. So, what's a laundry life like? The family of a laundry life in the Deep South. And as far as that's concerned, any immigrant kind of laundry labor sort of situation. I can remember, my father getting up, the crack of dawn, Monday through Friday at least, and going down to the laundry. And when I say down to the laundry, I mean literally, because we lived above the laundry. And in my research, I've found that just about every Chinese laundry had a family living either above, behind, or under the laundry. And that was true also for a lot of other immigrant merchants, like grocery stores and so forth. The families all lived on the premises. Part of that was to save money, no doubt, but also part of it was for security purposes, to like protect the resources in the store. Also, it was sort of like in some cities, it was very dangerous for Chinese to be out on the street after dark because they might be attacked, in certain areas of the country, at least in a certain era. So I was kind of struck by a lot of the parallels that I saw in the immigrant first generation laundrymen, grocerymen, small restaurant owners, and so forth. So anyway, in our case, laundry is not the most glamorous business that you can imagine. You're dealing with dirty, smelly laundry that no one else kind of basically wants to touch. So you're like, in one sense, dealing with a very unpleasant sort of task. But I suppose you could look at it another way. You could say, wow, we have magical abilities. We can transform these dirty, smelly things into, shining, clean, gleaming articles of clothing. And maybe there's some social satisfaction, of fulfilling that sort of function. But it's hard work. And in the course of doing this, I know that a lot of times the hired help wouldn't show up. And then there was this big work schedule to complete to get stuff on time because customers would be irate if their laundry's not ready on time. So my parents would have to work extra time, overtime, And we children, as we grew older, we also, participated in some of the work, maybe not the heavy-duty work, but certainly, we had responsibilities in the laundry and participated in the work. Growing up, we probably didn't appreciate that, but looking back in hindsight, I think we learned a lot about discipline. We learned a lot about responsibility. From our parents' point of view, they never really had to worry, where are your children? They knew where their children were. They were right, sort of like next to them, pretty much every day, and so helping out, with the family responsibilities. Laundry also had other kinds of problems. For example, I guess the thing that's joked about a lot with regard to Chinese laundries is the laundry ticket. The lost laundry ticket was sort of the bane of our existence. Many customers would just come in and expect you to know where their laundry was, even though they either lost or forgot their ticket. And some of them could get quite irate, if you didn't produce their laundry. But what that meant is you had to kind of go around looking through just about, say every package, but you had to make an educated guess, as to what size of package, how long ago it had come in, and so forth, and try to open it and see if it's right. No, it's not the right one. Wrap it back up, go find another one, and finally, satisfy people. So you had to do a lot of customer relations, because you're dealing with people. People are sometimes demanding and unreasonable. People would come in and say, oh, you lost my shirt. I brought in 5 shirts, there's only 4. You better pay for this, or I'm going to sue you, or whatever, or beat you up, or whatever, something like this. And then the following week they come in and say, oh, my wife left the shirt at home. I'm sorry that I made such a big ruckus. We had this shirt all the time. So, you're kind of dealing with those kinds of things, and that's sort of the environment that you grow up with. I guess anyone in any service industry has to kind of deal with customers who feel that they've been wronged. In terms of our life as a family, we really only had probably Sunday as a time when we were all kind of free, because during the weekday when we were in school, our parents were working and so forth, there really wasn't much in the way of family togetherness, I guess you'd call it. But I guess Sunday in the laundry business, at least, was kind of a day off. Although there was a lot of work to do maintenance work on repair equipment and so forth. But probably the highlight of the week would be the Sunday dinner at noon or something. And my mother very often would go and buy chicken and for dinner for Sunday. And she'd bring it home on Saturday, and it would be alive, of course, be in a little cage, and I would play with the little chicken all day Saturday. And then on Sunday morning, it's time for lunch, my mother would whip out her meat cleaver, and she'd grab the chicken by the legs, and the chicken would be there, I know it's not pleasant after dinner talk, but you can imagine what was going to happen. My mother very deftly executed, or whatever you want to call the chicken. I was 3 or 4 years old. I was just sitting there watching, and it didn't bother me. It didn't bother her. I mean, now when I think about it, I think I would have been should have been a little more upset. But that was just the way, life was, And so we had fresh chicken every Sunday or so as part of our dinner. Being in a small town, there really wasn't much to do. In those days, there was no television. My parents wouldn't appreciate television anyway. So we would maybe go to the movies. And then occasionally, my father would take me, or maybe one of my sisters as well, on a train ride to Atlanta. That was really our only early experience outside of our own, just very little small world. We went to Atlanta because we had an uncle there. My uncle doted on us. He would sometimes come to visit us. We would sometimes go to visit him. But it was really kind of a special thing for him and for us. He was, quote unquote, a bachelor, although he had a wife and 4 sons in China. And he was one of those cases where the family and he were separated for some number of years. So we sort of became his sort of surrogate family. We became his children, in effect. And he pretty much spoiled us rotten, and he would bring us a box of See's candy, not See's candy, Whitman samplers in those days. And then when we'd go to the train station, he'd give each of us $1 or something. And we thought, boy, our uncle is so great, our parents are so cheesy, they don't give us anything, but boy, Uncle Joe, he's the greatest. And so he was kind of like my hero, and he was really mainly my only contact with somebody who was Chinese outside of our own family. And so it was extremely valuable to me to sort of have that kind of relationship with someone, kind of outside the family. There were some other Chinese laundrymen in Atlanta as well, a handful of them, and I got to sort of know them a little bit, maybe not really well. My uncle would sometimes, and my father would sometimes take us down to the Onlyeong Association, which I called a gambling hall, because all I saw people was, playing cards or playing mahjong or something. And I would just sit around for a couple of hours, and then until my father was ready to go home, because it would take 2 hours to go home, because we'd have to take the train, because we only had Sunday to do this. So we'd go up in the morning, spend a few hours, then take the train to get home, so my father would be ready to work on Monday morning. And so, by osmosis, I kind of learned the concept that all Chinese run laundries. Because I didn't know any other Chinese, adults, that's all they did. It didn't necessarily bother me, I kind of thought it was a little odd, but, as a child, you form these weird kinds of concepts. And there really wasn't much for me to do except sit and wait, because I didn't have anything to talk to them about. But I would listen to them and nostalgize about China and talk about relatives and talk about what they're going to do when they retire and go back to China and so forth. And so I got this sort of picture that all these Chinese laundrymen in the South that I knew anyway, where you're working to send money back to support their families in China, their relatives in China, and that their ambition was to be able to make enough money to retire and go back to China. Of course, all that became impossible, in 1949, when the communists took over China, and then that became a real problem for some of these laundrymen, because their relatives now were landowners. And landowners were not particularly well treated in China. So that was one of the sort of unfortunate kind of after effects of that. So growing up in Georgia, obviously you must wonder about segregation. Where were Chinese in the picture? Since everybody was black or white except us, it was a sort of problematic issue. Some people treated us pretty decently, and there were some people who kind of were prejudicial and sort of were, if not hostile, sort of demeaning toward us, making fun of us, doing the slanty eye thing, doing the Ching Chong Chinaman, and running up and saying, can you say something in Chinese for me, things like this. So, they weren't being violent toward us or anything, but at the same time, we knew that we were not really white. But at the same time, in some ways, they did not have separate movie theaters for Chinese people. We only had black theater and white theaters. So they didn't seem to mind if we went to the white theater to see the movie. So in that sense, we were kind of white. As far as schools were concerned, there wasn't a problem for us to go to the white school. Although, in Mississippi, at least until about 1950, there was a problem, because there were more Chinese in Mississippi in the South than any other southern state. And there, Chinese were not allowed to go to the white school. Chinese had to form their own schools with the Southern Baptist Church, or in some cases, I understand some of them sent their children back to China for an education rather than have them, have a poor quality education. So anyway, our relationships with the community, I guess you could say, were generally reasonable. There were some very kind-hearted people who maybe also took a special interest in us. Give you a few examples. There was a man up the street who owned the hotel. It was the second biggest hotel in town, which isn't all that big, but still, it was, you know, a reasonably decent hotel for the times. And so my parents looked up to him as, you know, a wealthy man. He owns a hotel. So when he would walk down the street sometimes, he would see us children playing out in front of the laundry. And he would come up and he'd say, "Hey, little boy, you want some chewing gum?" And we said, "Sure, we want chewing gum." So my brother and I, we'd be out there playing. He would pull out a piece of gum and he'd tear it in half and give each of us half. And my mother would say, "You know, that's how you get rich. You watch that man there, you know, Mr. Hooks. He didn't get rich giving each of you a piece of gum, you know." So my mom was kind of the moralist, you know. She would take every opportunity to teach us a lesson in life and that sort of thing. And she would give us all kinds of warnings about things, you know, dangers of prejudice and so forth. She had a lot of superstitious, well-intentioned beliefs. She told us when we went to the movie theater, in the old days, they'd have a news of the day thing, and they would show various scenes, and then the camera would turn around and face the audience. It's all on film, but it looks like the camera's taking a picture of the audience. Somehow my mother got in her mind the belief that they were taking our picture and selling it to the movies. So she warned us that when that happened, to duck or to hold our hands over our eyes. Well, by then I was intelligent enough to know that she didn't know what she was talking about. But I thought I had to kind of either, you know, humor a little bit. But my mom was really probably, I don't know, I don't want to use a psychological term, but pretty close to, you know, semi-paranoid about a lot of stuff. But when you stop to think about it, there was a lot of good reason for her to be anxious and worried about various things. So it's probably better to be safe than sorry, you know, and to err on that side. And so that instilled a lot of caution in us. Another man, he was a manager of an office building, Mr. Shirley, and he was probably the more white-collar worker, managerial level, and he took an interest in our family, and somehow or other he would invite me up to his office in an office building just to chat with him, you know, and we would just talk about anything, you know. He treated me almost like an adult, and he was sort of like a surrogate father for me, because growing up, my father was busy working all the time. He spoke Chinese, he didn't know much English, and being in that situation, I can't say I didn't have any respect for my father, but at the same time, you know, I could see that he was different. I could see that he wasn't educated. I could see that, you know, he was sort of marginal in society. So from my point of view, you know, my managerial friend was kind of like more, I won't say more influential, but I kind of like looked up to him in a way probably more than I did to my father at that time. Then there were other people like my teachers in school who were all very, very encouraging, very supportive, very influential on me. So I think that in a way, being alone, I really wasn't lonely, but I was isolated. I was isolated culturally. I lived in the business district, so there were very few playmates, because after school, I would go this way toward downtown. 98% of the other students would go that way, up toward the residential area where people didn't live in their businesses and so forth. Maybe, who knows, maybe that's why I became a psychologist, you know. I spent a lot of time just kind of looking around, observing, because I didn't have anyone to really talk to. So, you know, I kind of became an observer. And so it wasn't necessarily all bad, you know, not having a lot of friends. I did have one playmate from elementary school. It was kind of an interesting situation. He had everything. We were like the prince and the pauper. His mother and father both worked. They made good money, and his parents had an apartment, and it had real furniture in it. I mean, upholstered furniture. We had wood crates and wood boxes and stuff like that. He had a nanny who looked after him after school. He had all the latest toys and everything, electric trains and everything that I could even imagine having. And I would go to his place after school, and we would play, and he would treat me as an equal and so forth. And then later I would, maybe his parents would drive me home in their car, maybe like the equivalent of 2 blocks. But that was the only time I ever even rode in a car when I was a kid, because we didn't have a car. And it didn't really make any difference, it really wasn't that important. But I mention these kinds of things sort of give you a flavor of conditions under which we lived. They were sort of Spartan, but it didn't really matter. We had security with our family, with our parents, taking care of us. We did have this sort of sense of isolation in a way, as I said. If you're the Chinese and you're the only one there, it really does kind of, make you feel a little bit out of place. Finally, at some point, my parents decided, as we were getting older, that we needed to move. And I guess that's not an easy thing to do overnight, especially when my father wasn't really ready to retire. So my mother was sent out sort of as a expeditionary tours. She came out with my older sister Mary to California, and she hardly knew how to speak English because she had led a pretty busy and sort of sheltered life. My father learned English from dealing with customers, and my mother really didn't have that opportunity. She really didn't have much decision-making power. And now, suddenly overnight, she was in San Francisco, and her assignment is to place Mary in a place so she can go to college in California, go and find some income property, go and find a building that we could buy, that we could live above and have a store below. Because Chinese have got to live on the same premises as where the store is. They won't do otherwise. So somehow, and also with the help of some Chinese-speaking real estate agents and so forth, my mother learned all about interest rates and loans and all this sort of arcane stuff, which still to this day I'm really kind of amazed that she learned all these things. But I guess I'd say my mom was a survivor. She complained a lot. She complained all the time. It drove me nuts. I couldn't stand it. But she got stuff done. She did not just sit around. And like later in life, after my father passed away, and she controlled everything, she became a stock market really devotee, and even started trading options and everything. And I was really stunned when I found out, but she was intrepid. It was Chinese love to gamble, and that was my mother's gambling streak. So there are a lot of other things I guess I could talk about Macon and growing up in the South. But I think because of the lateness of the evening, what I would like to really do is answer your questions. I'm sure you probably have lots of them. I just tried to kind of give you a general flavor of like why I wrote the book. I felt that our experience in the South, while not entirely unique, really hadn't been recorded adequately. That, as historians point out, most of the histories about Chinese are about Chinese in California or in large Chinese communities. And if no one writes about Chinese in isolated places. And I found since I wrote the book, there are a lot of places throughout the United States that were very similar in terms of isolation, where there are many parts of the United States where there were just one Chinese family or two Chinese families within 100 miles of each other, and they labored in pretty much in isolation. And so, in doing the research for my book, my memoir, Southern Fried Rice, I learned so much about laundries and the history of laundries prior to my even thinking about our own laundry that it sort of motivated me to do a sort of a social history of the Chinese laundry in the United States and actually Canada. And that's the Chinese Laundries book. And that isn't really about my family so much. It's to try to look at how America perceived Chinese laundries, and also point out the very essential role that the laundry played as a financial resource, an economic entryway for self-employment for Chinese. It was really the first way that Chinese were able to sort of accumulate some form of capital and develop their own independence. So let me see what kind of questions you might want to be.
How did families end up in such isolated places?
Right. That's what philosophers call an infinite regress question. My parents went to Georgia because they had a relative in Chattanooga who sort of helped them get started. So then we have to ask, how did that guy get to Chattanooga? And then we go back another 30 years, and it gets a little bit harder. As far as the South is concerned, the Chinese got there either through, at least some body of Chinese came in Augusta because there was a canal being built there, and Chinese were good at construction. They worked on levees like in the Sacramento Valley. They built railroads and so forth. Other Chinese were brought into the South around Mississippi and Louisiana to work in the sugarcane fields and to replace slave labor. It didn't work out. Those Chinese didn't stay doing that long, and many of them eventually started running grocery stores. Now, exactly whether those are the ancestors of the later generations there, that's a little iffier. But you'll find Chinese in Iowa, Minnesota, North Dakota, Maine, and so forth. And the same question is, how did they get there? It's inevitably because someone else got there first and was a relative and said, hey, come up here and keep me company. Yes. Who else? Yes.
How about housing?
Housing.
Discrimination in housing?
Oh, discrimination in housing. Well, for us, there wasn't a problem because we didn't have the best housing anyway. We lived above our store. It really wasn't even a residence, it was just sort of like a storehouse that we converted into a residence. So there wouldn't be a problem there. Now, if we had probably wanted to go and buy a house where all the mansions were, that might have been a problem. It would have been a problem, yeah. But we never really confronted that. Now, I have talked to other people, and they talked about that was a problem. That certainly certain districts that they would not let Chinese in. And we know that's true even in San Francisco as late as 1950. I remember when my mother came out in 1952, she got property on Polk Street, which was at that point the western edge of the Chinese community. There were not very many Chinese as far west from Chinatown at that time. Yeah. Other questions? Yes.
How old were you when you moved to San Francisco?
Right. How old was I when I moved to San Francisco? I was 15. I just finished junior high, and that's when we moved because my two older sisters were about to go to college and stuff.
So you went to high school in San Francisco?
Yeah, I went to Lowell High School when I got here, and that was kind of a rude awakening, actually, because it was a much bigger frog pond than the one I was used to. Yeah, well, in Georgia, they got some smart people there, but, Lowell High, pretty tough competition. So when I came from, being the best student in my school to suddenly being one of the small fish, it's kind of like an adjustment to me. Yeah.
What kind of machinery did you start your business?
Yeah, right. What kind of machinery did the laundry have? Okay. By the time my parents were there, it was not really a hand laundry anymore. Like a lot of the early Chinese laundries were hand laundries with an 8-pound iron that they had to heat over coals and get it hot enough, and then lug it over, wait till it cool down the right amount, and then put it on the clothes and not leave it on too long because you'd scorch the clothes, and then the iron would get cold, and you got to go lift it over and get it over the clothes. My parents had steam equipment, okay? So the machinery was more mechanical kind of thing. So the washers were bigger and operated by electricity and so forth. So I don't know, does that kind of answer your question, what kind of equipment we had? Yeah.
Did your parents operate a laundry in San Francisco?
By then they were sort of retired, and so they did a laundromat, which is a lot easier than doing a laundry. I mean, some people don't know the difference. I mean, a lot of times people say, oh, Celebrite Rice is about a laundromat. Well, it's not a laundromat. Yeah. So laundromat is kind of easy. compared to laundry. And when we first moved out, after a couple of years, there was a laundromat below this place where we lived on Polk Street. And then so they went out of business or sold it, and my mother took it over. And my mother, ever resourceful, kind of like ended up learning how to try to repair the equipment herself. And sometimes she did, you know, which was pretty amazing. But yeah, it was a laundromat. Yes.
You were 15 when you moved out here. Yes, sir. Was there an issue with generational dating as far as living in the neighborhood?
Oh, well, at 15 I wasn't dating. I was not very precocious. Probably a year or two later, you know, there could be potentially a problem. You know, it's kind of hard to say exactly. It might not have been blatant prohibition, but you know, everybody would stare at you, not necessarily in hostility, but because it would be so seen as kind of odd. But you know, it wouldn't just be the whites or the blacks who would be bothered by it. Your own Chinese parents would be bothered by it. That, you know, it's not as acceptable as it is today, and certainly. Well, one of the prime reasons why we moved to California was my parents wanted us all to marry Chinese people. And there weren't any Chinese people to marry down there. My uncle's children, when they finally came over, his sons came over in the 50s, and they lived in Atlanta. There was still a lot of matchmaking. So someone would say, hey, I know a girl over in Augusta who might be suitable for your son. Let's pair them up and let's meet them together and, you know, form something like this. So it turned out, ironically, that a couple of my male cousins in Atlanta, they ended up marrying other Chinese who were in the South, and I, who moved to California and then lived in other parts of the country, ended up marrying someone who's Jewish. So the best of plans, you know, don't always work, you know, but it worked out well. I mean, my parents were eventually reconciled, and you know, there wasn't a problem. But to answer your real question about would there have been prejudice, I think, you know, in the Deep South at that time, they really weren't that accepting. And certainly if it was a black-white marriage, it would have been a lot worse. Chinese, white, might have been okay, depending on, you know, how much you pushed it and so forth, yeah. Yes?
You said you did a study on the laundry history in the United States.
Right.
There was a incident during the Korean War when the government targeted some Chinese laundry people in one of the boroughs in New York,
Yeah.
that they were spies
Right.
for China because they were sending money back to their families. Do you know the story behind this?
Yeah, I know some about that. The question is about probably when the McCarthy era was at its height, and also when the communists had taken over China. Many Chinese immigrants had been sending money for some time back to their families in the villages and so forth. So there became a suspicion, especially the Chinese Hand Laundry Association in New York, which was a business coalition of laundrymen to sort of protect their business interests. And this sort of became a witch hunt and an attempt to try to incriminate some of these leaders with being communists or communist sympathizers or whatever. So they were harassed and you know, followed by the FBI and things of that sort. Eventually, it sort of worked itself out, but not without, like you said, a lot of harassment. That didn't affect us in Georgia because we were the only ones that they didn't want to bother with us. But I mean, like New York, where there were at one point like several thousand Chinese laundries, small laundries by the way, but nonetheless a large number. There was that sort of harassment.
Did they end up hanging themselves in a suicide?
I believe one man did commit suicide. Yeah, right. To Save Ourselves, to Save China is a book that kind of deals with this part of that history. Yes. Yes.
You described getting up in the morning was extremely cold. Were there no furnaces? No heating?
Okay. Did I describe getting up in the morning as extremely cold?
Yes.
I don't remember saying that, but it was.
I read in the book.
Oh, in the book. right. Okay, I thought you meant I said it tonight, and I'm trying to think. Okay, did I say that? Okay, I'm glad you clarified that. Okay, in the winter, yeah, it was extremely cold. It wasn't as cold as in Chicago or New York, but 20 degrees is pretty cold, and so yeah, in the winter, getting up would be extremely cold. But on the converse, in the summer, going to sleep at night was extremely unpleasant because it was extremely hot. We've been sitting on top of a laundry that had been steaming away all day. It's hot and humid there. I can still remember to this minute now. I'd be there trying to sleep. We had this oscillating fan. And when the fan would come over, you get a little breeze. Ah, that's great. And then the fan would go over. And that's how you lull yourself to sleep. That fan would come, the fan would go, the fan would come, the fan would go, because everybody had to get a little bit of the air, So yeah, we had both extremes in Georgia. Yes. Who else wants to know about it?
Was there much in the way of competition for laundry in Georgia?
Yeah, everywhere there gets to be some sort of competition. We had no competition with Chinese laundries. We had one in San Francisco where you had a lot of Chinese laundries. There was competition, and there were laws or rules set up by the association that Chinese laundries could not be any closer than 10 buildings next to each other because you don't want people to get fights over customers. But we did have a dry cleaning competitor who was like 2 doors down, run by Caucasians, and my mother was kind of bitter about them getting certain advantages because they were white, because like the city would give them a loading zone or a yellow zone in front of their store, but we couldn't get one. And then if a customer pulled in there and came at our place, the other people would go and drive them away, that sort of thing. So yeah. That was competition. We survived. There was enough business. Certainly during the 40s and early 50s, business for laundries was good during the Second World War. I've never quite understood why it was the military didn't have their own laundries, but the soldiers coming in on weekends to go carousing or something, and they bring their laundry in to us to do, But I mean, we can't complain. We got the business, and there was plenty of business then for everyone to go around, so I don't think there was a worry about being driven out of business from competition. There were, of course, problems in other parts of the country about unfair laws and so forth that were prejudicial toward Chinese laundries, and sort of trying to give some advantage to white laundries and stuff, Yes?
Did you have black customers?
Yes, we did. Yeah, we had both black and white. We were not prejudicial. If you brought dirty clothes in, we washed them. We wanted your money. In fact, that was one of the real advantages of running laundry. One of the joys of childhood was, customers would bring in laundry, and we'd have to either tag it or count it or something. But this customer brought in 4 shirts, 3 power trousers, or whatever. And occasionally people would leave money in their clothes. And when we saw out the laundry, the money would come out. Finders keepers, losers sweepers. We had a collection of fountain pens, classic Schaefer, Waterman, Eversharp, whatever. We had wristwatches, galore. My mother had a whole cabinet full of jewelry and stuff that no one ever claimed. And as we got older, we would go and harass our mother to let us have this stuff, this booty, that we collected from the laundry business. But as far as customers were concerned, yeah, we had a lot of black customers. One thing that I could definitely see was how prejudices affect, people's abilities, because a lot of the blacks couldn't even write. So, if they lose their ticket and we'd find their laundry, we'd ask them to sign their name to show they picked up the laundry. They couldn't do it. We'd have to put an X on it for them. Okay, and so very early on, I could sort of see, this disparity in the abilities of people. A lot of the blacks were working class, like mechanics. They bring in overalls and things like that. A lot of white customers would bring in business shirts, with white collars and stuff like that. Yeah.
How did you celebrate Chinese holidays? How did you integrate the...
Right. Okay, good question. Did we celebrate Chinese holidays? Not really. I didn't know anything about Jung or anything until I came to San Francisco. I didn't have a clue what it meant when I got here. I'd never eaten at a Chinese restaurant. I didn't know what a wonton was. I thought it was a weight or something. I didn't know anything about these types of foods we eat tonight. I think the one occasion we celebrated was on the day when the war ended. My father brought out a bunch of little firecrackers in front of the laundry and he fired them all off. And that's very memorable. I don't know where he got them from, but he'd been stashed away somewhere. He undoubtedly probably bought them from Chinatown, Europe, because we get mail order from San Francisco. They send in an order to get a lot of like dried mushrooms, fui or whatever, And so we had some sort of tie with Chinese culture in that sense. My parents read the Chinese newspaper that either came from San Francisco or New York, I don't know which. But there was no way to celebrate Chinese. We couldn't have our own dragon dance or anything. There weren't enough of us. We did the parade, who's going to be the spectators, right? So we didn't know anything about that at all. Although what was interesting was after I started doing this research, I found that there had been, according to the newspaper, some Chinese in Macon as early as 1910. And in fact, the newspaper described it as the Chinese colony. And I looked at that and I said, what? A Chinese colony in Macon? I mean, I assumed all my life we were the only Chinese in Macon, ever, which was a bad assumption. I mean, just because when I was there we were the only Chinese doesn't mean there weren't any earlier, but whatever happened to them, I don't know. But according to this newspaper article from the local newspaper, in 1910, there was a Chinese colony in Macon. 14 Chinese, that was the colony. And it was describing in the newspaper article that they were going to celebrate Chinese New Year's. And it was talking about all the exotic, strange things that the Chinese did on Chinese New Year's and so forth. That was like in the local newspaper of news interest. So they celebrated Chinese New Year's in 1910 in Macon, but by 1940, no more.
Did you have any difficulty adjusting to all the Chinese out in San Francisco?
Boy, yeah. Did I have any problems adjusting to all the Chinese in San Francisco? Yeah. It's kind of a strange thing, to walk down the street and suddenly see all these Chinese people. And also, I had a hard time learning all the names, because everybody's name sounded alike. Everybody was a Li or a Wong or a Wu or this and that and the other. And they were, they all sounded alike to me, so that was hard. They all looked alike to me, because I wasn't used to looking at Chinese people. So there was a little of that, I kind of really wanted to, get to know Chinese people because, I said, I'm Chinese, and they're Chinese, and, these are my people. But yet, so I felt like an alien in some sense. And they'd all stare at me and say, how'd you get so tall? And, and then at that time, I actually did have a Southern accent, believe it or not. And then people would, Chinese people would come up and, kind of good-natured, kind of make fun and poke fun. It wasn't anything hostile or anything. But, I managed gradually to get accepted by Chinese people and, of my generation, my peer group, and I even joined the Chinese Student Club finally. Okay, so once I got into that, I figured I've been accepted. Other questions?
She described that during the war that Madam Chiang Kai-shek visited Macon, Georgia, and your family were invited to welcome her. Did you actually get to meet Madam Chiang Kai-shek?
Okay, questions about when Madam Chiang Kai-shek came to Macon in 1943. Now, I know you don't believe that really happened. Why would she want to come to Macon? Yeah, she actually did, honestly. The reason for this being is that the Soong sisters, Madam Chiang, Mei-ling Soong, and her two older sisters, were sort of, in a sense, wards of a minister in Macon. And he had been in China, and he was a friend of Charlie Soong, the father, who had made a fortune, selling Bibles in China, So he was very, into Christianity. And when danger started lurking in China, he wanted to get his daughters over to the United States where they'd be safer. So he sends them to Georgia, where they thought they'd be safe. So they go to Wesleyan College in Macon, not to be confused with the Wellesley College in Massachusetts. So the two older sisters go to Wesleyan and get degrees. Mei Ling was only like 12 or 13 in 1910. And actually in 1910, she was not allowed to go to the white school. She tried to go to the white school, and they wrote a newspaper article and said she was an alien and she can't go. So anyway, 1943 rolls around, and times have changed in 33 years. You know, China is now the valued ally of the United States against Japan. So attitudes toward China have greatly, improved. China is seen as, a friend. And so Madam Chang comes back to address Congress to raise money for and get support from the United States for China. And so she goes all through the country, and one of the stops is Macon. And they give her an honorary doctorate there. And I was only 5 or 6, but I don't know so much that we were invited to come meet her, but some photo opportunity, someone sort of said, "Oh, are there any Chinese around? Oh, there's 4 little kids down there. Why don't we bring them up?" And I don't know that I was too young to actually totally remember. She may have walked by and patted me on the head or something. I didn't get her autograph, and I didn't shake her hand. I didn't get a picture with her. But we were there, and she was there, and that was sort of like my little linkage with a little bit of piece of history there. Yeah. We live like right downtown, like right in basically the heart of downtown, business district. It wasn't a residential area, so it wasn't like we were in the black section or the white section. We were in the section where businesses were, where virtually no one else lived. We were the only people that lived downtown. Everyone else came to work downtown and left. We just lived there.
When you were like in elementary school, did the white kids invite you to birthday parties?
No, never. I never went to anybody's birthday party. I never. I don't know whether that was deliberate or what. It just never happened. It didn't bother me. And I suppose if I'd known there wasn't such a thing as a birthday party, I might have felt, why am I not invited? But I think probably, I had a very sheltered life. I didn't even know there was such a thing as a birthday party for many years, and it wasn't important to me anyway. Well, I've enjoyed the opportunity to talk with you, and I hope I've answered most of your questions. And if you have more questions, I'd be more than happy to chat with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. It was a very enlightening evening. If you all would like to be enlightened more, he still has some books for sale, and they'll be at the table back there. And before we adjourn, I'd like to just introduce John's family, who happens to be here to support him, and my good friends too. His sister Jean, wave. She was my roommate in college, and I had China with a southern and her sister, she's here, and Jean, you have a son, Richard. Anybody else from your family? But I know a lot of you, because you were all, some were at Cameron House. Anyway, thank you for coming, and love your support.